Hi guys, full moon in Pisces is happening on Monday, September 20th at 28 degrees Pisces at 7:54 p.m. Eastern. And I'm here to break it down for each sign and tell you what it means in general. My name is Anastasia. I'm a traditional Western astrologer working with tropical system of the zodiac. I do readings. I run an Instagram page, currently doing a month of astrology and self-love, a passion project. Check out the links in the description if you wanted to book a reading with me. There's a link down there too. So this full moon is a culmination of a cycle that got started on March 13th this year, 2021, with a new moon in Pisces. It was like a major lunation with Sun, Moon, Venus, and Neptune in Pisces. And Pisces is the sign of your dreams. It's the sign of, breaking away from reality, and Virgo has that energy of like bringing it back to reality because they are two opposites. So look back at March 13th and see what kind of projects you started, what kind of dreams you were dreaming, what was happening in your life back then. This full moon might affect you a lot if you have any placements at 28 degrees of mutable signs, Gemini, Pisces, Virgo, and Sagittarius, but it is going to affect all of us. So some of the significations of it come from the meanings. Full moon is always sun against the moon. So there's always me versus others. There's always that need for balance. And we are balancing the sun and Virgo, which is the planner, which is analytical, detail-oriented, to focused on the minutia of life, right? Like Virgo has that tendency to sometimes not see forest for the trees, and Pisces is the opposite. Sometimes Pisces forgets the details, right? Like if you have any Piscean friends in your life, like maybe they forget to text you, and it's never for the bad reason, but maybe they're dreaming away and they're not as focused on being in the moment. So needing to find balance. Here you are connecting with the Piscean energy of your dreams, but you're still trying to keep one foot on the ground, right? Like how can you pursue your dreams but have a solid plan of Virgo? I really like that the ruler of the sun, Mercury, is trining the ruler of the moon, Jupiter, because Mercury is currently in Libra. Jupiter is in Aquarius. They are forming a harmonious aspect between the two of them, which promises this full moon to be positive and beneficial and very much growth oriented. Jupiter being the sage, the guru, all about faith and larger concepts, connects to Mercury. Mercury is the scientist. Mercury brings the facts and stats, right? And Jupiter comes with faith. So the two of them being together, I think, are very supportive, and you might be receiving some good news. You might be completing a cycle of growth. You might be understanding something Jupiterian, which is, once again, some like concepts that are harder to put into words, and actually putting them into words with Mercury aspecting this Jupiter. And I also think it's quite important with the full moon in Pisces, being that Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac, to think about faith in something bigger. Like full moon is the ending, it's the completion, it's the change. Ending is about one door closing, another one opening. It's very rare that something completes and life just ends, right? Life ends, but then there's that question of like soul and reincarnation and all of that kind of stuff, which we don't have to go into. But like completions often lead to new beginnings, and I think Pisces is, because it is ruled by Jupiter, it's the sign of trust. And Virgo, the sign opposite Pisces, can be too controlling and like too focused on figuring out every single little thing. And I have 3 planets in Virgo, so speaking from experience. So I think a big part of this full moon too is learning to trust. And whatever happens, whatever happens in life, when things don't work out, when you feel sad, when you feel like it's not in your favor, when you don't get the boy or you don't get the girl or you don't get the job that you wanted, leaning into trust, leaning into Pisces, right? Believing that there is higher purpose for things, and maybe you don't have to know all the details, right? As a Virgo, that's the lesson I'm learning the last couple of years. Quite like, a lot that's been my life, learning that you don't have to know everything. And I think this full moon is very much about surrendering, trusting that the universe has your back and that regardless of what happens, it will always have your back. So good vibes, positive energies. Let's break it down and let's see what it means for each sign. So if you are an Aries rising, this full moon is happening in your 12th house, and there's exchange of energy between Jupiter in your 11th and Mercury in your 7th house of relationships. So you may be going through some kind of cleansing and release, and it could be release of friendships, it could be release of relationships. Maybe you discover something about your friend, because of that like 11th, 7th aspect, and it's time to release that friendship. It's time to release that negative influence. There could also be growth in your relationships, and your friends can be a source of some kind of inner understanding, because full moon in the 12th house is very literal about, getting rid of something that's no longer serving you. And it could come from either negative experiences in your relationships, but it feels more positive because Jupiter is trining Mercury. So you may, talk to a friend, maybe you talk to a therapist, maybe there might be some kind of realization that drives you to release and heal, and maybe focus on rest a little bit more, focus on your mental health a little bit more, go within. Could be a great time for you, Aries rising, to spend some time alone, go in the nature, go somewhere to a water source and just like hang out and spend some time alone. Could be a great time when you are releasing bad habits, when you are releasing self-defeating thoughts and self-defeating notions. Maybe you tell yourself that you cannot have a job that you want, right? And maybe this is the time when you actually start going towards it. Or maybe that's some of the good news that you're getting with Mercury trining Jupiter. Definitely focus on balancing your mental health and your rest with the work that you're doing, and trust your intuition. Maybe it's also about learning to trust your intuition and focusing within a lot more. If you are a Taurus rising, this full moon is happening in your 11th house with Jupiter in the 10th trining Mercury in the 6th. Jupiter in the 10th trining Mercury in the 6th feels like good news at work. Maybe your project comes to completion. Maybe you receive recognition. Maybe you get a raise. And then that somehow connects to the release in the sector of networks and friendships and social media. So for some of you, maybe this recognition at work makes you rethink your connections. Maybe you feel like there are people in your environment, in your network, in the 11th house that don't quite support you, and the connections that feel unsatisfying. So there might be a release of certain friendships. There might be, with that like 10th career action, maybe you are completing something and it's making you question like what your next goal is, what your next purpose is. So you might be also undergoing some kind of process of like changes in your dreams and changes in your goals, and trying to figure out quite literally what's next for you. There might be a change in a group dynamic. Maybe, you're just completing a project together with your friends. And another possibility, because 11th house rules your fans and it rules your social media, there might also be certain changes to your social media presence. Maybe you feel like social media is taking away from your professional goals and you decide to let it go. Or you are change your name. Maybe you start a page that actually reflects your goals a little bit more. Could be a great time to, surrender and trust that life has a way of figuring things out and showing you the way. So if you feel a little bit confused and unsure about what your next project should be, or where your tribe is, where your people are, maybe this is the time to ask the universe for guidance and hope that it will show you the path and show you the people that need to be there to support you. If you are a Gemini rising, this full moon is happening in your professional sector, your 10th house, with Jupiter in the 9th trining Mercury in the 5th. You may be getting good news about education, some opportunities related to education. Maybe it's education of your child, because fifth house rules children. Maybe your child is getting into the school that you wanted. Maybe you are getting to travel somewhere. There's also very much a possibility for you traveling somewhere for work. Like maybe you get a job opportunity that allows you to move to Paris, right? And that changes your life, and it changes the life of your child. And now you need to figure out what to do, because the full moon in the 10th house brings completion and change to your professional sector. So maybe you've been applying for a job and you find out that you get it. Maybe you've been tired of a job you have and you quit. There's definitely possibilities to completion, release in the professional sector. Maybe you go into a new direction. Maybe you've been playing with the idea of doing something creative. Also like 9th house is your beliefs and 5th house is joy. So maybe you've been trying to figure out how to add more joy into your life, and this change, this completion in your professional sector allows you to add more of that. Some like other possibilities could be finishing a project at work, completing, getting recognition for something. It just feels like whatever is happening, you are definitely focusing more on things you enjoy versus things that need to get done. If you are a Cancer rising, this full moon is happening in your 9th house with Jupiter in the 8th, trining Mercury in the 4th. Jupiter in the 8th, Mercury in the 4th. You may be getting news connected to home and family. Maybe you were buying a home and you hear that the owner of the house accepted your offer. Maybe you are investing into something. Maybe you hear good news about a family member. There is also a possibility with the 8th house Jupiter of you paying off a debt. Can also be, of course, you getting a debt if you are buying a home. But there's a possibility of some kind of like financial change, money influx, money circling around, either coming from home or going into the home. So maybe a family member is like helping you pay a debt, right? And with the full moon in the 9th, that might inspire you, or there might be like a cycle of completing some sort of like expansion. Let me elaborate, right? So maybe you've been studying, right? And now you're graduating. Maybe you've been looking for a home with the topics of a home, right? And now you're finally completing that cycle. So like you're ready to move because you bought a house. Maybe you're traveling somewhere. Maybe you've been looking for a job and you found a job, and now it's actually a moment for you to travel and go to a new place. There also, on an inner level, 9th house has to do with the way you see life and the things you believe. It's the house of higher mind, higher learning, and also house of philosophy and astrology. And 8th, 4th, that dynamic could also symbolize, I think, a lot of Cancer risings have been dealing with like inner difficulties and inner healing, and 4th house is also about things that make you feel comfortable. So maybe there's a certain sense of like releasing some boundaries or finding a new source of comfort, and that transpires changes in your beliefs. Maybe you start to view yourself as not a victim, but a hero of your story. There might also be a completion of some kind of legal issue, likely in your favor. Let's say like you're dealing with some kind of like real estate drama, and that 8th, 4th shifts things in your favor. And finally, if you are somehow involved with like traveling to foreign lands and you're waiting for a visa, or you're waiting for your travel documents to get approved, that could also be a possibility here, quite a positive possibility. If you are a Leo rising, this full moon is happening in your 8th house with Jupiter in the 7th, trining Mercury in the 3rd. So Jupiter in the 7th, trining Mercury in the 3rd. You may receive positive news, and there may be a good development if you are involved in some kind of collaboration. Maybe you are a member of a podcast, or maybe you're working on a writing project, and this could be the time you decide to like partner up with someone, start a joint venture, invest into technology to promote your podcast. And so the full moon in the 8th brings that cycle of growth and collaboration to completion. There might be changes financially for you. You know, maybe you're paying off a debt. Maybe your partner is getting a new job and that is affecting your finances, because 8th house has to do with other people and their resources. There's also a possibility of you receiving an inheritance if that's something you've been dealing with for a while. There's like an aspect of liberation with the full moon in the 8th house where you release something, and maybe, you know, the 3rd house being activated by Mercury being there, maybe you find a way to deal with hard times and deal with heartache or past traumas and turn them into art, or turn them into something creative, you know, express them through your writing, express them on your blog. Could definitely be a very therapeutic time, because 8th house has to do with our fears, things that are very hard to put into words, and things that are kind of like, you know, anxiety. It's the house of death. So you may also deal with some of these topics and maybe come to understand something about yourself. If you are a Virgo rising, this full moon is happening in your 7th house. Jupiter is in your 6th currently, trining Mercury in your 2nd house. So Jupiter trining Mercury could bring positive work developments. Maybe you get some kind of bonus. Maybe you get recognition professionally. And that could also lead to increased sense of self-worth. And whatever is happening for you financially, or whatever is happening for you professionally, or even just that inner feeling of self-worth, can lead to changes in your relationships. So say it's professional development, right? Like you got a big bonus, or you've been working on something for a long time and that came to completion, or you got some recognition. Now you decide to start a business with the full moon in the 7th house. Or maybe, you know, you really enjoy working with a colleague and then you decide to start your own venture with them. Maybe your sense of self-worth and the fact that you now make more money inspires you to release a relationship that isn't so healthy for you. So full moon in the 7th can be walking away from a relationship, or it can also mean committing to a relationship. If you were in that, you know, ambivalent state a little bit where you weren't sure what's next, you may realize that you actually want to continue and move the relationship to a next level. Meditate on topics of releasing control, because as a Virgo rising, it might be hard for you to release control, but the full moon in Pisces tells you that, you know, you cannot control the other person. You can only control yourself and the way you react to things. So this could be very much about finding a sense of surrender in your relationships. If you are a Libra rising, this full moon is happening in your 6th house with Jupiter in the 5th, trining Mercury in the 1st. Jupiter coming back into our Libra rising here, 5th house, and trining Mercury in the 1st. Seems to me like you may have been focusing on having more fun in life. Maybe there's been more opportunities. Maybe you've been investing money into your self-growth, you know, focusing on understanding yourself better. Mercury in the 1st house may have given you more opportunities to speak, just connect with your inner child. And then full moon in the 6th could also symbolize changes connected to your self-worth. It could bring changes to your work projects. And maybe, you know, maybe you prioritizing more fun, that change at work is connected to that, because maybe you've been working too much, and that side of you that really is focused on enjoying life is telling you, hey, you got to work a little less. You got to take some things off your plate. So there's definitely a possibility of completing a project and unloading some things off your plate. There might also be changes in your work environment, changes with your bosses, and changes to your health are likely, you know. And as I've been encouraging all rising signs with Pisces energy in your 6th house, maybe the answer to your health issue is not as clear as, just like go take a pill. Maybe it's a lot more about bringing balance between your mental health and your physical health, because that's what 12th and 6th house are about. So prioritize rest, prioritize fun and joy, and that might naturally come to you with this full moon in Pisces. If you are a Scorpio rising, this full moon is happening in your 5th house, the house of romance, creativity, and children. And Jupiter, the ruler of the moon, is trining Mercury, the ruler of the sun, between your 4th and your 12th house. So there's been some serious action surrounding your home. And maybe, not just home, but also a place of security, kind of like figuring out what makes me feel secure, where home is for me, but also possibly quite literally like renovating a home, dealing with like home issues. Maybe you've been spending a lot of time at home, feeling like it's your safe space. So with Jupiter being in the 4th, Mercury in the 12th, there's a possibility that you finish something home related. You may be moving to a foreign place, like a foreign country. Maybe those topics at home that make you also question what makes you feel safe and secure bring you to the full moon in the 5th house, which is about connecting with a partner on a more intimate level. Completing a creative project, learning to just go with the flow a little bit, not control things romantically, perhaps just like trusting that things are the way they are. With the full moon in the 5th, there can also be a release of something unhealthy in your house of relationships, or closing a chapter with your child. If your child is, going to school in a different country or a different town, definitely might be like a sense of wrapping up a relationship, wrapping up a chapter in the life of your child, or wrapping up a creative project. And for some of you Scorpio risings, this might signify getting pregnant or having a child, which will also be a completion of a chapter where you were pregnant for a while. If you are a Sagittarius rising, this full moon is happening in your 4th house, so bringing release in the sector of home, land, property, and family. At the same time, Jupiter is in your 3rd, trining Mercury in your 11th. So maybe you've been expanding your network. Maybe you've been connecting with people, connecting with your neighbors, finding a way to communicate more openly with Jupiter and Mercury activating your 3rd and your 11th. And with the full moon being in the 4th, maybe that newfound connection and newfound friends can bring changes in your like inner life, because full moon in the 4th house could bring changes with your home dynamics. It could bring changes in your family. Maybe if you've been having issues with a family member, they can come to completion in that axis of 11th, 3rd house. Maybe you have been thinking of the way you communicate with them, and now you approach the situation differently. Maybe you realize that you actually need to put boundaries in place, right? Like maybe you've been too giving with a family member, and with this full moon in the 4th, you decide to kind of protect yourself, protect your inner being, which is 4th house is also that inner self, whatever makes you feel happy and secure. There might be a completion to your home renovation project, to your place of living. Maybe you're moving, maybe there's some kind of changes, in the design of your home. And I think for some of you, with the 11th house being connected to the larger community and 3rd house being connected to your smaller community, finding a sense of belonging, maybe questioning what makes you feel secure, where do you feel like you belong, what place makes you feel happy. And 4th house definitely could mean that you decide that you need to move, or could mean that you find a sense of belonging in the place that you are already. And maybe it's just a question of painting your room an olive color, or maybe it's a question of getting a whole new home. If you are a Capricorn rising, this full moon is happening in your 3rd house, and Jupiter is in the 2nd, trining Mercury in the 10th. So for Capricorn risings, your finances and your professional life has been in focus this year. I'd say your finances may have gotten better, with Jupiter coming back into your second house. Maybe you've been feeling better about yourself. And so full moon in the third house can ask you to use these resources that you've gotten, to use the professional aspirations to, to make something out of it. Like basically, if you've been getting more money, how about you invest this money into yourself? How about you invest the money into your hobbies, into your skills, into your writing project? Because full moon in the third house can bring a lot of focus on your skills and hobbies. So, you may complete a writing project, you may receive some notes telling you that there's more work that needs to be done on a project. There might also be a change in your dynamic with your neighbor or your sibling. Maybe you come to a compromise and you start to agree on things if before you were disagreeing on things. And I think too, for some of you, like if you are a writer, for example, maybe you are called to listen to your intuition a little bit more because it's Pisces energy, and tap into your imagination and bring some of that to your work, or start a side hobby that will allow you to experiment more with your intuition. If you are an Aquarius rising, this full moon is happening in your second house, and there's a trine between Jupiter in your first and Mercury in your ninth. So for some Aquarius risings, maybe you moved this year, or there's been some kind of like changes surrounding your education, your place in the world. You've been, I think, very focused on like being authentically yourself and trying to pursue things that make you that allow you to expand. Jupiter in the first house wants to expand. Mercury in the ninth wants to learn as much as possible, gather all the data, prepare, and then also expand. So there's a sort of agreement there. So full moon in the second can inspire you to spend money on something. So maybe that desire to expand leads to you making a big purchase. Full moon in the second can also bring rethinking your finances. Maybe you start a savings account. Maybe you know that you have all these goals and you need to finally start saving. Might be paying off a debt. It's a possibility here. Finding a new job, finding another source of income. If you've been studying, Jupiter in the first, Mercury in the ninth, maybe you're completing that education cycle and now you becoming a teacher, or now you're ready to use the skills for something more valuable. The topics of self-worth may come to light, and maybe you're questioning like what makes you feel worthy and what makes you feel valuable with all the changes that's been happening in your life. And Pisces is the sign of trust, and Pisces is also the sign of Jupiter, and Jupiter is wise and it has the knowledge. So maybe you don't, but trust that Jupiter will guide you, and the full moon in Pisces will bring some answers into your life, even if not this exact second. If you are Pisces rising, for Pisces risings, this full moon is happening in the first house with Jupiter in the 12th, trining Mercury in the 8th. So Jupiter in the 12th and Mercury in the 8th is synonymous with some spiritual healing, with focusing on mysteries, astrology, tarot. Maybe you've been investing into that. Maybe you've been really deeply engrossed in therapy, and now the full moon in the first, you're ready to release something that's no longer serving you. Full moons in the first bring completion as far as it comes to your appearance, your personality, your sense of brand, your habits. The full moon in the first with 12th and 8th activating it or ruling the lunation, you may realize something about yourself. There might be, you see that you have a certain fear. Maybe you're afraid of commitment in relationships, and you look at it closely and you realize that it's not the relationships you're afraid of, it's that sense of abandonment. And when you see it closely, you understand where it came from and you're able to release it, and that changes your life, and that brings a lot of deeper inner growth and transformation. So for Pisces rising, this full moon is quite significant because it could bring, changes in your appearance, it could bring changes in your health, in your mental state. You may be completing a project that you have started that was very physically involved and just was pioneered by you, and you got started back in March. I think it's very much about you. It's very much about, you know, that old self that is dissolving and the new self that is getting ready to reborn. So trust your intuition and believe that this full moon is going to give you some answers. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please subscribe and support my work, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.